pronouncing this idea of Thriving Thursdays, but we really wanted from the SIETAR Austria team to promote this idea of sort of growth mentality, you know, thinking about mindfulness and moving from this idea of just surviving the current turbulent times to actually thriving during these times. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Milton Bennett join us today. Thank you very much. I know you don't need very much introduction. I'm sure a lot of our audience are already familiar with you, but maybe just a couple of words. So Milton, you're particularly well known across the world for developing the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. You're one of the best known intercultural theorists, particularly from a constructivist perspective. You're also the founding director of the Intercultural Development Research Institute, which has a branch in the USA and also in Europe. As well as that, you're a writer, trainer, advisor, consultant for all sorts of universities, for the European Commission. Your work is known across the world. We're very happy to also have you in Austria at the Carinthia University of Applied Sciences as one of our lecturers and also trainers. So thank you for joining us, Milton. How are you doing? Where are you? And can you maybe just give us a quick insight into life currently for you in these turbulent times?
Yeah. Thanks for that nice introduction. I'm currently in Milano, and I arrived here in January, just in time to be locked down here in Milan from Washington State in the US, which then subsequently got itself locked down as well. It was the first place that this virus cropped up in the United States, or at least at the time it was thought so. Apparently, maybe it was actually lurking in San Francisco somewhere. So, yeah, it's, you know, it's one of those situations where personally, I'd have to say that I'm perfectly comfortable. My family is comfortable. Nobody's sick. One person that I know that I've worked with for many years, a travel agent, unfortunately has died of this. So I've had just a touch of a connection. But I'd have to say, compared to a lot of people, my experience has been not a tragic one. It's like every day is an exercise of empathy, really. And I do make some attempt to do that, to spend some time every morning reading not only the dry news reports. I subscribe to all those kind of science newsletters about, you know, here are the charts on the latest statistics, and here's how we define this and that, which I think is a necessary way for us to be critically thinking about this. But I also try to read the stories about what's happening to people, you know, just because it stimulates some empathy for those of us who, in fact, are not living those frontline experiences.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, I know this is also something that we, you know, do you think and effective, or, you know, valuable sort of sense of empathy through these sorts of readings, you know, finding out about stories, individuals that are directly affected?
I missed the first part of that, but assuming that you're asking whether I think that's a valuable thing. Yes, I certainly do. But I mean, obviously to the point where you're not harming yourself in the process. You know, I mean, and I do think it's possible for us to so consume the tragedy around us that we ourselves, you know, lose resilience, you know, from not maintaining our boundaries. Yeah, it's like any kind of empathy, I think. Whereas if you do it too much, you lose yourself out there, and you become diffuse and lose your energy. But if you don't do it enough, you also are not interacting with your environment, and I think you fail to be participative in in the surrounding situation. So there's a balance here. It's such a strong situation that we're in that it's important, but we're locked away from it in many ways. At least I am, I feel. And so it's a matter of choosing to participate to a level, to not ignore it, because even though you could, I don't think that we'd be learning what we need to learn from it if we did that.
Milton, if we think about sort of the types of emotions that we're experiencing, also from a neuroscience perspective, one thing that seems to be clear is that this is sort of a situation that creates a different type of fear experience, that a pandemic is a very specific type of emotional reaction that is not sort of the normal. It's associated with predator fear, and so a lot of what we're experiencing happens also unconsciously. Do you think that sort of by practicing sort of these or engaging in empathetic experiences, we can somehow tap into a little bit that dealing with that sort of unconscious impact?
No, I think you raise a crucial issue. To me, we've been pushed a little faster than I thought was going to happen into this choice point, this turning point between becoming more conscious or becoming less conscious. And I do think that that's what we're facing here. The less conscious position is the movement towards isolation, towards self-protection, towards essentially trying to take ourselves back to an earlier period in our species, a more primitive period where we had not developed the strategies for dealing with one another that we have sporadically developed over the last several hundred, perhaps a couple thousand years. And I think there's a clear push, perhaps driven by our species memory of the fearfulness, the fearsomeness of this kind of a threat, that it's drawing us back. It's making us, some of us anyway, I would exclude myself from this, and probably most people watching this, supporting these atavistic political leaders who want to drag us back into some kind of a castle where they're the king and they can send people out to do war with the neighboring country. And we need to resist this. And the way to do that, I believe, is to see this as a choice point between becoming less conscious or more conscious. And by being more conscious, as you were alluding to earlier, it means that we're thinking about what we're doing. It's being intentional. And I think the danger to us here is that we lose intentionality. We find ourselves so overwhelmed by either the stimuli of the events or the fear of what's happening, that we lose intentionality. And that, I think, makes us susceptible to the polemics of some of these horrible political figures that are floating around right now, that make us victims of the fear, which is real. But we don't have to be victims of it. We need to acknowledge it. We need to recognize it. We need to empathize with those people who, in fact, are being severely and tragically affected by it. And yet, we mustn't succumb to it. We mustn't give up our consciousness, I think. Otherwise, we become, fodder for the people who are wanting to take us back in that direction.
But it's a difficult balance, really, isn't it?
Well, if by balance you mean it's difficult to maintain intentionality when you know you really can't do much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just on a session yesterday at a conference, and somebody, in the chat, somebody asked the question. So I was talking about a campus-wide effort to introduce intercultural learning across several activities in the campus, which included multicultural programs. And I was saying that the thing that we need to start out assuming is that we live in a constructed reality, to go back to my constructivist. We need to live it, because only if we assume that we live in a constructed reality can we imagine reconstructing that reality? I mean, otherwise, we're victims of whatever the reality is that's being defined typically by people who are in more powerful positions than ourselves. So for us to counter that definition of reality, it seems we need to constantly be aware of the constructed nature of reality. And the question I was asked was, if all of your experience is being a victim of the reality that somebody else has constructed, how can you maintain such a view? And I think it's a question like the one you're asking. It's a very good one. And the only way I could respond to that is to say, to exercise intentionality in small ways. Mm-hmm. I've always remembered there's this guy named Assagioli who, you know, decades ago now, wrote a book called The Act of Will. Mm-hmm. And in this book, he made this recommendation. I have to say, I don't follow this every day, but it's sort of a neat idea. He says, every day you should do something just for the sake of doing it. He says, nothing is dangerous to you or others, you know, but he said, for instance, stand on a chair. There's absolutely no reason to stand on a chair for a minute, except that you've decided to stand on a chair for a minute. And it's something you can do. It's something we can be intentional about. So one of the questions that you sent to me beforehand is, what are some ways that we could be using this this seclusion to practice consciousness? And I think that might be one way, is to practice intentionality. Well, can we intentionally consume the news, for instance, as opposed to allowing it to overwhelm us? Can we intentionally maintain certain relationships, which in fact are kind of easier now because you have to sign into something to have the relationship? You're not just, you know, dropping by, you're not passing by people in the hall. You actually have to initiate that relationship. And so that's a kind of intentionality. Then maybe that's what we can do on a small scale to remind ourselves that we live in a constructed reality and we can reconstruct it. We will reconstruct it. And let's be on the consciousness side of that, I hope.
So I'm back to Václavic with the situation is hopeless but not serious.
Yeah, it's true. Our Austrian,
yeah.
Václavic, who has informed both of us. So yeah.
So Milton, you've mentioned sort of the importance of empathy, also this idea of intentionality in terms of everything we do, also interactions. Are there any other aspects of constructivist sort of consciousness or intercultural consciousness that you would say serve us particularly well in current sort of uncertain times?
Well, I'm doing quite a bit of journaling. You know, I think more than I would have otherwise. You know, I've always done a blog now and again, but I find myself now sort of routinely writing down notes of things. You know, maybe they'll become blogs, maybe I'll use them for something, but maybe not. Maybe I'm just writing things down. But I think, kind of like standing on the chair, there's something about deciding to write something down, to having a thought, and rather than saying, oh, well, that was a thought, or that was interesting, you know, to actually say, oh, I think I'll write that down. And of course, we know from all kinds of training in creative writing and other things that writing those things down like that does indeed hone your consciousness. It focuses your awareness. It keeps you alert. And I think maybe the danger that we've got here is that we're going to become less alert. Yeah. Perhaps from the overstimulation of this constant threat, perhaps from the lack of stimulation of being isolated the way we are, but there is a danger to maintaining alertness. And so by writing down your thoughts, it seems to me that's something. And if you really want to get creative about that, start writing down your dreams. No, really.
Yeah.
It's just the intention of writing down your dreams makes you remember your dreams better. You know, if you actually do it in the morning, there's an amazing amount of memory that you are able to acquire of the dreams that otherwise, you know, you might remember for a minute in the morning and they're gone. But if you intend as you go to sleep to write your dream down in the morning, it focuses you on the dream, first of all. And secondly, sometimes you have interesting thoughts at night like that.
It's reminded me of reading about I think it was a tribe in the Amazons that get up at 4 a.m. and do exactly that, sort of stand around, and tell each other about their dreams specifically. First thing they do. Okay, Milton, in terms of, so we're talking maybe a little bit as well about this idea of alertness. That's something that, or a possible way that societies could change either positively or negatively. If we take the concept of global citizenship, the current crisis, is that changing how we'll see the idea of global citizenship?
Oh yes, I'm afraid we'll be in two camps. And I hate to do this. There are two kinds of people in the world. The joke: people who think there are two kinds of people in the world and people who don't. But unfortunately, it really does seem to be rather easy to fall into that dichotomizing right now, where there seem to be those people who are searching, as I said in a recent blog, for a mythologized past that never really existed, but they're willing to fight to the death, to retrieve that past that never existed on the one hand. And then there's another group of people that I think continue to look to the future. They say, oh, the past is the past, and we need to be reconfiguring ourselves and our reality and our environment to be dealing with the new reality that we in fact have created. I mean, we may regret having created it the way we have, but we have indeed done that. I think that global citizenship is going to be the camp of people who say, let's work together to recreate the world in a way that allows us to, not only us to survive, but maintain some equitable level of survival for other people. I mean, you see again this split in the people who say we should inconvenience ourselves by not going to the barber and by not eating out in the restaurant, because it's saving people's lives. And other people who are saying, you got to die sometime. Let's just, develop herd mentality and have those people die. I suspect, I don't hear anybody saying this very overtly, but I kind of suspect that the people who are saying that, A, don't think it's going to happen to them, and B, think it's only going to happen to poor people and people of color. I believe there's a strong racist dimension, and here I may be relating to the United States, where disproportionately people of color and poor people are the ones who are suffering the most from this, both because of their job conditions, but also because of other prior conditions of, anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm concerned that we're facing a fight between essentially the social Darwinists, the neoliberal people who think that they're the people who are at the top are the civilized people and everybody below them are barbarians in some way. And as I'll quote the author of a book about the Cambodian genocide, the Khmer Rouge, who the title of the book about that genocide was "To kill you, to kill you is no great loss." And I'm wondering if there isn't a group of people who are saying, at least for you to die is no great loss. And there's another group of people, I think, who are also very strongly motivated to go against that idea and say, no, all of us matter. And we really do need to be caring for the common weal. And that includes all of us. And we have all these resources. It's a matter of how we share those resources. And that seems to be the motivating force. That's to me, global citizenship is going to move in that direction. Otherwise, it's not a globe. I mean, if that view doesn't prevail, I'm pretty sure that the alternative is going to be a return to some prior condition of isolated camps. And I really don't know what that would look like.
Okay. So there's really only the other option that we want to hope for.
One of the books I read recently in my ample spare time that I've been meaning to read for some time now is the book Sapiens by Harari. Interesting kind of sweep of history kind of book. As you know, I really like this Julian Jaynes book on the origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind, from 30 years ago, which was a similar kind of sweep of history book. And I think there may be something useful for us in reading those big sweeps of history, because we're pretty likely to be at one of those turning points that we've had in the past, the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution. It almost certainly we're at one of those points, and we just don't know what's on the other side of it. But by looking historically, we can see what was on the other side of some of those other turning points in history. And I think there's something to be learned from that. At least it makes us more conscious to think about it.
More conscious. Okay, that's our key. So I know we've gone slightly over 20 minutes, so I have to turn over to our audience and ask if there are any questions. So I would ask, I have both the chat and the questions and answers section open at the minute. I can also unmute you if you want to sort of add a comment and ask me to talk to. Oh, we have quite a long question here. Hold on, sorry, just let me move up. Okay, we have one question around, Milton, I'm not sure if you can see these, so I'll read them out. Was global citizenship not an illusion anyway? Could we really be that? So let's define a new one. Is a sort of question comment.
I don't think it was an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the people who were pursuing it were probably not sufficiently thoughtful about the people who either did not want to or could not want to pursue some of the aspects of global citizenship. But to me, the movement of humankind has been towards larger and larger unities, and but not totalitarian unities, but federated unities of one sort or another. And to me, global citizenship is the next move of that kind of movement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We have I think it's a comment from Sveta Buko, who's online as well. She said, Dr. Milton, thank you for your authenticity and wisdom. You always find a way to elevate your listeners, readers on the one hand, and dive deep into foundational societal aspects on the other. Every day is an exercise in empathy. Define your reality and deconstruct it are her takeaways, I think, from today. She said also, thank you for sparking humor and depth, and always delivered with an American open mind and an Italian style. I think we maybe need to ask Sveta for more comments on that. She said she's going to go and stand on a chair for a change and write down her dreams. Thank you, Sveta, for that. So let me just check. Do we have any other questions, or would anybody like to unmute themselves, or would you like to comment on that at all, Milton?
No, I think I'll just.
No, I think we'll just leave it. We'll leave it. Oh, yeah. So another question.
I'd be happy to hear back from Vincent if nobody else wants to say anything, to see for us to have a little exchange about that global citizenship, since that was his point. That was
okay.
His, I think.
Yeah. Maybe let me. We have another question in, but let me try to unmute. Where have we? If I see Vincent. So yeah, I think I can only turn, I'm not sure if I can turn your video on, but your audio is on. Hello, Vincent. Hi.
Yes.
Yes. Would you like? Hello.
What about the global? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
I don't know. It was very strange. I just only saw you, and I couldn't get into any kind of a more connection. Anyway, no, I was the one with this global citizenship. I thought, I thought it was maybe sort of an intercultural, intellectual claim we have that we are global citizens, but we do have our preferences, don't we? So I thought it was maybe like intellectual image that we put on ourselves as being global citizens. And the reality, I mean, yeah, we have our preferences. We can also be, slightly racist from time to time, or frustrated. So I was just wondering, was global citizenship would be then the ultimate level of the DMIS, or do you put any connection to that, or how do you see that? Because to me, it's again, it's a little bit of an illusion, intellectual idea.
Well, yeah, no, Vincent, I certainly agree with you that we have overstated probably not only our own level of participation as global citizens, but sort of the general state of global citizens in the world. However, with that caveat, I would say that it remains a good goal, and of course, yeah, I do think it's probably related to that last stage of DMIS, where the notion of integration, as I've always talked about it, is not similarity, it's not homogenization, it's rather the integration of difference. It's the ability for us to all of us become more agile in the way that we handle differences, cultural differences, other kinds of differences. And it seems that the key to global citizenship is not a higher degree of homogeneity, but the key is all of us to become more agile in handling higher levels of contact with difference. And I don't think that's a new idea, but I would agree with you that we probably have overstated how close we've come.
And there's quite a lot of work to do now, post-coronavirus crisis.
Yeah, and of course, the forces that have always been opposed to that kind of global citizenship have, in many ways, been using this crisis to try to move in the other direction, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you. We have another question and comment from Lisa. Lisa, I can unmute your mic if you would like to ask it yourself. Otherwise, yeah, I can read through it. Hello, Lisa. Would you like to join us? Hi. Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Milton. Wonderful to hear you. I've never heard you speak before. I came in a few minutes late. I apologize, but I'd like to talk to you. Now, there's a couple of things I like. I'm very much d'accord with you in this increase of consciousness and this increase of intentionality will certainly help us in moving away, I think, from the polarization, because the polarization comes, of course, from the fixed perspectives that we tend to have. And you just spoke of, the globalization will not come through an increased homogenization, but through an ability to hold multiple perspectives at the same time, which is also in tune with your theories on empathy and being able to feel into the position of others. If from kind of off the cuff, what is your feeling? What way would you expect us to go? I know at a micro level, it all begins and ends with the individual. Are we prepared to wake up?
Well, I think a lot of people are not only prepared to wake up, but in many ways are awake, but not sure what to do with that. And you remember, I was around during the last consciousness revolution, and I think that there are people that there are lessons that were learned from that some of us anyway continue to remember, goals that we had. If not the age of Aquarius, then certainly living in a more conscious time. I think there's going to be a fight. I do, and I hope it's a political fight, but it's going to be a very, very severe political fight between those forces that would like to use this to reaffirm that kind of neoliberal, neo-Darwinism, I think, and people who want to move in another direction.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see it brewing in the United States, which is also where I come from. And, it's pretty, on the one hand, it's pretty scary. But on the other hand, and I think, consciousness and unconsciousness will probably grow in equal measure. And it's always just sort of the Darwinistic question, what will prevail. But I think it is also, it's in times of challenge that we rise to the occasion. We don't wake up when things are good. We wake up when it starts to become, I'm speaking from myself, we wake up when it hurts.
I agree with you, Lisa, and I've always been against the people who say let's intentionally create a trauma so we can learn something from it. I've always been against that, but here we are in the one anyway. So
right.
let's to learn something. You're right. Yeah, you're right.
So Lisa, thank you very much. I'm kind of conscious because I know we're coming to the end of our time. We have, I think, 3 more questions. So I realize we should be finishing off now, but maybe we'll just very quickly try to provide an answer for these 3 very short, because I wouldn't like to leave them. So the first question is, going back to this, I think, our discussion around global citizenship, but particularly global diplomacy. And Joseph would like to know whether or not global diplomacy should be there to fix global problems like this pandemic, and how big a role does the discussion culture of the United States play at the minute. He asked for the relationship with the WHO, US, China, which is very complex, but maybe we could also incorporate Tamara's question a little bit around that, is in terms of, you know, basically the role of culture and how it's impacting also, you know, the governments and the countries, and how this current crisis is being dealt with.
Well, I think it's pretty clear, isn't it, that that insofar as we are fragmented from one another, and of course what's going on in the United States is an attempt to increase that fragmentation. Insofar as we are fragmented from one another, we are less able to deal with these kinds of global conditions. That's always been true of global climate change, global climate destruction, and we're now seeing it again with this pandemic. This only responds to a coordinated global effort. How is that going to happen if we're not able to coordinate with ourselves and use skills that we as a field in intercultural communication have been developing for the last half a century or more? If we can't use those now, when it's so clear that anything short of that is likely to be, if not our entire demise, then the demise of a very large number of us. If we can't do it now, well, I think it's clear that we need to be doing that. We need to be moving in the direction of more global coordination and the diplomacy. And anybody who's going against that, like the current situation in the United States, needs to, those of us who feel strongly the other way need to be as coordinated in our political action as the people who are supportive of that. That's been difficult in the past. People who are more on the liberal side have a tendency to be more respectful of their differences and consequently less coordinated. I think we need to get over that and figure out how to be both respectful of differences and also coordinated in our efforts to move in a direction that we know is necessary for our survival.
Mm-hmm. Milton, that's great. That sort of takes us to exactly the idea behind these talks, which is again to showcase a little bit this sort of the value of intercultural communication competencies at the minute. We have a last question that brings in the virtual component, so I'd like to maybe just finish on this. Maybe you could comment very briefly. Do you have any comment on the virtual impact and connectivity for adaptation and integration of differences, and how to support the development of intercultural competencies?
Well, along with all the rest of you, you know, I'm in the middle of figuring out how to make this more of a virtual-based thing. I've in the past been pretty clear in saying I think development occurs in face-to-face group-based situations, and it doesn't work so well virtually. That, you know, digital styles of communication are good for transmitting information, but not very good for facilitating development. I think I need to get over that and start figuring out how to use these increasing numbers of tools that are being presented by some of you who are participating in this program. I know, so. Yeah, you're not too old to learn new tricks.
Well, on that note, I will say thank you very much, Milton. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great. Thank you very much to our SIETAR Austria team, the interns that are coordinating our events, and are also organizing their own series of student talks on Tuesday evenings, Thoughtful Tuesdays, which I think is lovely as well, because the idea there is that they're talking to young professionals, students, and also looking at sort of the needs that they have currently in terms of also managing the current turbulent times. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I've taken you a couple of minutes over our time today. We'll try to stick to the 30 minutes next week. Milton, thank you. It was great having you.
everybody. Nice to have the opportunity.
Thank you. Great. Okay. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.